All right, everyone, it looks like it is 12:05. So if we have any people jumping on, they'll just be joining us as we go. So thank you all for joining us in our July virtual forum. It's hard to break out time in our day, but we really appreciate you being here with us. So before we get started, excuse me, for those of you who aren't familiar with Partners of Scott County Watersheds, we of course are the organization hosting this forum today. We are a nonprofit located in Scott County, Iowa, and we are dedicated to reducing flooding and improving the watersheds in our communities. So we have lots of stuff coming up. So we have another forum, we do it every month. So our next one is August 17th, and it's going to be talking about some LSAMP landings research, which I think Brian is going to touch on here shortly. And then we have an opportunity for people to get involved and directly contribute to improving our water quality in the area. And that's with our fall snapshot. So you can learn more about that on our website or at extremecleanup.org. And we couldn't do it without our partners. So we have lots of organizational partners that help us out, and we couldn't do it without them. If you are looking to become a member as well, there are lots of opportunities. So if you're interested, we have some of that listed here, but you can also check out our website to learn more. And then finally, thanks to the generosity of Iowa Corn, we have free nitrogen test strips available, as well as some technical assistance with those. So if you're interested in receiving some test strips, just send us an email and we can get those sent to you, or we can bring them to you in person and help conduct some water quality tests on your land, see if there's anything that we can help you do to improve your own water quality. So without further ado, I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brian Ritter. He's going to, of course, present today on finding creative ways to fund conservation. So I'll hand it over to you, Brian.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here today. I'm going to share my screen here in just a second if I can figure out how to do that. So a little bit about myself. I serve as the executive director of Nahant Marsh. I've been with Eastern Iowa Community Colleges for actually 19 years, serving here at Nahant Marsh for the last 14 years. As a matter of fact, I just had my 14-year anniversary as a Nahant Marsh employee. So I'm thrilled to be here talking today about something that I've been very excited about for a long time. Nahant Marsh has grown pretty rapidly over the last decade or so. And as we've grown, we've had to get creative about how we fund this place. Nahant Marsh is unique in that we are a nonprofit 501c3, and we're one of the few nonprofit environmental education centers in the state of Iowa. Most are run by the County Conservation Board system, which is great. But we were formed in the year 2000 to kind of fill a void, to step up and be the organization that works to protect Nahant Marsh while providing environmental education opportunities for the community. So I also want to say part of my slides today, I have to thank Judy Joyce from Impact 7G. She's not here, but some of the slides came from a presentation that her and I created for another presentation. So anyways, if you don't know Nahant Marsh, I'm not going to talk at length about Nahant, but what I will talk about is how we're looking to figure out ways to continue our mission, further our mission, and continue to fund it. And so, but if you don't know Nahant, we are technically in Davenport city limits. We're in Southwest Davenport. Our mission is to protect and enhance and restore the marsh through education, research, and conservation. And vision is to foster wonder, appreciation, and stewardship of the natural world. We So really there's three main components. It's education, research, and conservation. Our education program, in 2007, we formed a partnership with Eastern Iowa Community Colleges, and EICC was brought on to help essentially build our program. That first year in 2007, we served around 1,800 kids. Our peak year at 2019, before the pandemic hit, we served over 22,600 people that year. Majority of them were children and families and things like that. So we've seen this rapid growth in our education program. The other main thing that we do is research. And so we've really been ramping up our research since about 2012. We were funded by the National Science Foundation through EICC to be part of this alliance called the LSAMP Alliance. LSAMP is the Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation. So each summer we're able to take on primarily undergraduate and some graduate college students to do really hands-on applied research that helps us better understand and protect the marsh. And so we, for instance, one example of the research project that's been going on for actually 11 years now is research on a endangered turtle called the Blandings turtle. We actually have had funding the last several years to put radio transmitters on these turtles. Last year's efforts, they were able to find a pregnant female, and we worked with Augustana College to induce that female, and she laid several eggs. Those eggs hatched into 4 baby turtles that we then released for the first time this spring. So we're essentially jump starting this species that has declined rapidly. It's possible that this will be listed as a federally endangered species in the next couple of years. It's being studied right now. Another endangered species, this is a federally endangered species, the rusty patch bumblebee, was found here at Nahant Marsh last summer, as well as a couple other places in the Quad Cities, Alinawick Forest Preserve, Niabi Zoo, and on some private property. And as a result of that, we formed a partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So 2 of our interns this summer, full-time interns, are we're sharing with the feds, and they're going out and spending half their time doing bumblebee research with this U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, a federal agency. So the third main part of our mission is conservation, and we have been able to accomplish so much with conservation over the years through a variety of partnerships, especially with groups like AmeriCorps, with just our general volunteer base that has been incredible. But when we started, Nahant Marsh was 78 acres. Today we're 305 acres. We are actively negotiating for a few other parcels around us. And you can kind of see on this map the wetlands that exist here in Southwest Davenport. There's probably about 700 acres total wetlands in just this part of Davenport. Across the river from us is a pretty incredible place called the Milan Bottoms, which is well over 2,000 acres of wetlands and bottomland forest. And then, of course, Credit Island, a really neat old city park that has some incredible wetland and forest resources on it. So as we've grown, we've looked at how do we grow in a way that has the best impact on wildlife, on water quality, things like that. And so we are looking, to the future. We're currently doing a master plan with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to kind of help guide our next 20 years and see where we need to go next to have a much better impact on really what is the greater Mississippi River ecosystem. Like I said, volunteers have helped tremendously. Every year we do a cleanup. I'd encourage you to get involved with one of our cleanups if you haven't done so. But this was a couple years ago on our new property that we actually have turned now into a wetland mitigation bank. So we use a variety of tools to get the job done here, and to protect these really cool resources. Now, fourth main thing that we kind of offer, and we've been expanding this, is recreation. So we're in the midst of a capital campaign that will allow us to expand our recreational trails and add certain amenities like some more picnic shelters, restrooms, signage, things like that. And ultimately, we hope to someday have about a 6 or 7 mile long trail network that will allow greater access to the marsh, but at the same time, will allow us to protect certain areas that we view as sensitive. So part of the way that we've gotten stuff done, like I alluded to, is our incredible partnerships that we've formed over the years. And this is just some of them. There's a couple main partners here. I mentioned Eastern Iowa Community Colleges. The city of Davenport is another one, in that they actually own a portion of our property here. We have a long-term agreement with them that we do the management on those parcels. AmeriCorps, St. Ambrose, Scott County. I mentioned Impact 7G, which is our partner for our Wetland Mitigation Bank, and I'll talk more about them in a minute. But so we've done all this, what I view, I'm a little biased, but we've done all this incredible work to better protect Nahant Marsh, to provide what we feel is really valuable, important environmental education for our community. We're doing research that is not only important for the marsh itself, but beyond. And so all of these things are great, but it costs money to do them. So the question is, how do we continue to fund and the protection of this place? By the way, what you're looking at is a map of Nahant Marsh that we kind of colorized, but this was the original hand-drawn map from 1837. And what you notice is that the marsh was a big body of land. It was an old oxbow, so a side channel of the river. There was actually a creek that came into Nahant Marsh off the bluff, Walnut Creek, that's since been rerouted over to Blackhawk Creek. But also there was a town called Rockingham that flourished for a time. But so there's a great history story to tell, as well as this natural resource. So getting back to my question, how do we fund Nahant Marsh? So, you know, we've got more land. One way that we've explored, and we had to start getting creative, because, you know, everybody taps, especially the nonprofits. We all kind of tap the same sources. We go to the riverboats for money. We go to the community foundation. We go to some of the same donors over and over again. And we're very fortunate that we have a fairly affluent community who is incredibly generous. But at the same time, that can only get us so far. And so we've been exploring ways for a long time to generate more revenue. And one way that we came up with that fit with our mission, because I'm very, I don't like to drift from our mission. I think it's important to focus on the mission, and things will come. But one way that we found was wetland mitigation banking. And so the whole idea behind this is that if we restore wetlands, we can sell mitigation credits, and those mitigation credits then provide funding for future restoration, plus a little bit of extra money. Now, question is, well, how does this work? Well, this whole process is called wetland mitigation banking. And before we even start there, I think I'm talking to a pretty savvy audience, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page and answer this question: what is a wetland? Well, if we look at it by what is defined by federal law, a wetland is characterized by three things. It's got hydrophilic plants, so plants that like wet conditions. Like this is a picture of a wonderful hydrophilic plant called arrowhead. Those things will only grow in wetland conditions. So if you have arrowheads, you probably have a wetland, but you have to meet two other criteria. The other criteria is the type of soil. So hydric soils are formed under hydric conditions. This is a picture of what we would call gley soil. That gley color is kind of a combination of gray clay. I think that's where they came up with the word gley. But gley is a really distinct type of soil that you find throughout wetlands. The top layer, of course, is full of rich biomass, but over time you get this distinct layer of gley soil that really forms under kind of like low oxygen conditions that you'd get when you have standing water. The third thing that determines whether you have a wetland or not is hydrology. Now, by federal law, it is if you have water at or near the surface, within a foot of the surface, for 14 consecutive days in any given year. And so if you have those three criteria, you have a wetland. Now, the Clean Water Act that was originally passed in the 1970s, and there's been several amendments to it, states that if you destroy, and especially Section 404 is what we're concerned about. Now, we're getting deep in the weeds. If you want a lot more information, I provided a link here, or you can just search epa.gov and Wetland Mitigation Banks. And this EPA website has a tremendous amount of information about it. But so in basic terms, we have a law that if you destroy an acre of wetland, you're required, or if you destroy some wetland, you're required to replace that wetland. And generally, it's kind of like a 2-to-1 ratio. So if you destroy an acre of wetland, let's say, you're required to replace the equivalent of like 2 acres of wetland. So which wetlands are covered? Well, this is a moving target. So the waters of the US are constantly being redefined, and it's really by each administration. So, you know, one administration will kind of expand what they define as the waters of the US and therefore are protected under the Clean Water Act. Other administrations have shrunk that definition. Regardless, currently what it says is that any territorial sea or any traditionally navigable water, so like the Mississippi River is a navigable water, any tributaries that are perennial or intermittent, so any streams that run year round or even intermittent streams that directly run into those bodies of water like the Mississippi, certain lakes and ponds and impoundments, and wetlands that are adjacent to those. So like Nahant Marsh is adjacent to the Mississippi River. Any of these bodies of water are considered waters of the US. And so if you alter these waters, you are required, generally speaking, to do something to mitigate that alteration. So if you fill in a wetland that's right next to the Mississippi River, you'd be required to do mitigation. So in general, most businesses, or, you know, let's say the DOT has to build a bridge over the Wapsie River and they have to take out a half acre of wetlands. Well, the DOT or Walmart or whoever, really most of those entities don't want to get in the business of building new wetlands and maintaining them in perpetuity. What they'd much rather do is go to a certified wetland mitigation bank and buy credits from them. And so we have been working with, like I said, a entity called Impact 7G that has helped us to develop a wetland mitigation bank. We started this process back in 2016, actually, and have now, as of fall 2020 been accepted as a mitigation bank by the Corps of Engineers, and we are now able to sell credits to entities that are inadvertently destroying pieces of wetland. So if we go back to, the issue that we've had, and that's like, how do we fund this place? We want to keep expanding the marsh. We want to keep offering more and more education. Well, traditionally, this was, as of 2019, this was our puzzle. So we had about 60% of our revenue was private donations, was from partnership support. So like our partnership with EICC or the city or whoever, and then membership sales. So we do have a certain number of members. 13% of our funding was from grants. 16% was in-kind support from people either donating time or material, or more so the city of Davenport and EICC providing in-kind work for us. And then about 10% was program revenue. So over the years, this has always been a debate, like, we have kept our programming really affordable, and we do that on purpose because we want people from all walks of life to be able to access the marsh and access our programming. And we'll probably continue to do that. So we've had to figure out ways to continue to offer programming to the masses while funding our overall operations. And so with that being said, we are very fortunate that we have great donors, but there's some downsides to it. Donations are great. Sometimes there's strings attached to those donations. So if you get a grant, generally most entities that provide grants are just funding specific projects or funding, a building addition or whatever. There's unfortunately very few granting organizations that fund just general operating support. But so we've had enough money to maintain ourselves, but how do we grow beyond that? And that's where this wetland mitigation banking came in. So like I said, in 2016 is when we started exploring the opportunities for wetland mitigation banking. And we figured out that if we bought this parcel of land, we already own this triangular shaped piece of land, but if we bought this second parcel, we would have enough land to make a wetland mitigation bank. And that's the other nuance of wetland banking, is that the Corps of Engineers is not going to let you make a wetland bank on like 1 acre of land or even 10 acres. They want larger impacts. And that is, I think, something they've learned since the early 90s when this whole thing started with mitigation banking, is that they've gotten a little bit more strict about how you do it and what thresholds you have to meet. I think in the early days, my understanding is that mitigation banking, you could just kind of dig a hole and let it flood and get credits and walk away. Today, it's much more stringent. They want you to meet certain thresholds, and they only release certain amounts of credits for you to sell every year. And so anyways, the total acreage of these two parcels that we own is about 65 acres that we've constructed our wetland mitigation bank on. I should say too, there's different types of mitigation banks. There's wetland mitigation banks, and you can have different types of credits with those mitigation banks with wetlands. We have both emergent and forested wetland credits that we sell. So an emergent wetland would be more like a marsh that has, if you can envision cattails and, herbaceous types of plants, whereas a forested wetland is just that, it's trees. And so we actually have credits that we can sell for both of those, because we've created more emergent wetlands here, but we've also created some more forested wetlands. The other sort of newer type of mitigation bank is stream mitigation. So, let's say somebody has to alter a stream or do whatever, they can buy credits if you create a bank creates a stream on their property. We haven't done this yet, but we're actively exploring that. So some definitions, the banker or the developer, in our case, Nahant is the banker. We have this piece of land. We developed new wetlands on it and enhanced some existing wetlands, and therefore we get credits for that. The bank is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They're the ones who really are, they hold up the credits. So they'll say, okay, you've met your threshold. You have 5 more credits that you can sell. And who buys these credits would be the permittee or the buyer. So that would be places like the DOT who's building a bridge, or Walmart who's building a parking lot and taking out an acre of wetlands, or housing development, or whatever that may be. And so that's just some general terms. So this whole process is incredibly complex, and that's why when we started looking at this, we knew that we couldn't do this ourselves, and we had to hire a company with experience. We went out and searched for various companies, and we found one here in Iowa that had good rapport with the Corps. They'd actually built a wetland bank before, and so we decided to go with them, and that's Impact 7G. Let me say that I don't endorse one company or over another. There's certainly other companies in the Midwest that have experience, but at the time, they have a Iowa City office. We really liked them, and there is no way we could have done this without a good contractor. So they kind of led the charge. We had somebody else do a wetland delineation, figure out where the existing wetlands are. We ended up having to do geomorphological studies. We had to do engineering. We had to do an archaeological study because of one of our parcels is located on the site of an old town called Rockingham. And so we found a few interesting artifacts when we did that archaeological study, but we paid a lot of money to do it too. We had to do all the permitting. There was a lot of staff time. There's construction. So there was a lot of time and money that went into this, and even buying the land that went into this upfront. And then, but the benefit is for us, we want to build more wetlands around us. I'm going to go back actually real quick. We want to build more wetlands around us. And so we were able to, through this process, construct more wetlands. We took an old sort of degraded farm field that has flooded fairly frequently the last decade, and we excavated it and created more wetlands on that site. And now we have better improved water quality. We have more capacity to store flood water. And let's face it, floods are becoming more frequent here on our stretch of the Mississippi River. We have increased recreational opportunities. We're building a really cool trail network through a portion of this wetland bank. We have more land that's set aside and preserved. And then on top of that, we've got some revenue coming in from this. So it's all about return on investment. This was a scary venture for us. We're a nonprofit, and we're traditionally a fairly small nonprofit. And so, if we crunched the numbers, and I lost a lot of sleep about this, figuring out if this was the right move for us. So if you look, these are our real figures. We spent $345,000 on a 39-acre parcel. We invested $120,000 just to do all the studies that needed to be done, the archaeology, the geomorphology, the engineering. It cost us $300,000 to construct it. So we actually, had hired an earth moving company to move a ton of dirt for us. We had to purchase, so far we've purchased over 300 trees. We've purchased about $20,000 in prairie seed. And so all that went into construction cost. Plus, over the next 10 years, to maintain the thing and to continue to monitor it, it's going to cost us about $200,000. So there's our investment. We're looking at close to $1 million that we'll have spent by the end of this thing. But we have 33 credits to sell, and what that translates to is about almost $2 million in credits that will hopefully sell within the next 10 years. So yes, we're putting $1 million into it, but we're getting hopefully $2 million out. And the bottom line of that is that does make sense for us to do it. And especially because this is part of our mission. We want to build more wetlands. We want to better protect Nahant Marsh, better protect the Mississippi River. And this is one way that we can do that. So the question is, what do we do with the excess funds? Well, the excess funds will just go into our operating. So it'll help continue to fund education, continue to fund research, and hopefully allow us to continue to buy more land and protect more land around us. So lessons learned so far. Number one is patience. I was all gung-ho on this when we started this process in 2016. I thought by 2018 we'd be selling credits and making money. It took a lot longer than that, and that's because the Corps of Engineers and this team called the Interagency Review Team, which is made up of the Corps, Fish and Wildlife Service, EPA, and DNR, are very thorough about vetting any organization that wants to build a wetland mitigation bank. And so there was a lot of kind of push and pull back and forth. They ultimately have been a great resource for us. And I, in a way, as a person that wants to see more wetlands protected, I appreciate that they are as stringent as they are, because at the end of the day, somewhere somebody's taking out a couple acres of wetlands, and we're basically the ones that are guaranteeing that we are replacing those wetlands. And so, as I mentioned, in the old days, I think there was a lot of issues with some higher quality wetlands being disturbed and destroyed, people buying mitigation bank credits, and people were just replacing those with pretty low quality wetlands. So we have to ensure that we have high levels of biodiversity. We have the right hydrology. And so all of those things, the Corps of Engineers watches over us closely. And like I said, I'm glad for that, because I want to see high quality wetlands on our landscape. The other thing is, it's not a quick return on investment. As I mentioned, we've already invested around $800,000 in this project. We have only sold a handful of credits because the Corps just released our first percentage of credits. And the Corps, as long as we're meeting our benchmarks with hydrology and biodiversity, they will continue to release credits over the next 10 years. So it's not like we just have this and we sell all our credits and we're just made whole. It does take time, but we're almost to a point where we're close to even now. And then the third main point, that with any project, and whether it's wetland mitigation banking, or there's a whole lot of other creative ways to make money in conservation, or I should say not make money, but to fund conservation, whether that's CRP projects, whether it's wetland reserve projects, whatever it is, you have to find good partners. So we were very fortunate. Like I said, we found Impact 7G, who's been a great resource for us, a great partner. They're of course getting compensated for their work, but their knowledge has been incredible for allowing us to grow and develop this wetland bank. So you can see this is one of our wetland sites. That's the mighty Mississippi River there. That's the I-280 bridge. We actually own this parcel already. We've owned this for years. This is called Carp Lake. So we bought this 39-acre parcel because number one, it is adjacent to our Carp Lake property. There was some existing wetlands that flowed into our wetlands there. But this is a great connector between South Concord and the Mississippi River Trail, which is a national trail system, to the main marsh. And so I'm gonna try to show you a quick video here, if this will load. This was, we took a lot of drone footage as we were constructing this marsh. So you can kind of see the process. Our partners, Impact 7G, took that footage and put this video together. So there's not any sound, but you can kind of see. We call this the Clark property. This was the landowner that we bought this 39-acre parcel from. So what they're doing is rough grading. We did some massive earth moving. The other issue that slowed us up was 2018 when we started earth moving, or 2019 and 2020, I should say, is when we really started earth moving. We had a bad flood in 2019, but in 2020, we also had flooding. And so that slowed up our progress. This parcel is next to an old, unfortunately, an old salvage yard or junkyard. And so we created a berm along there. That berm will double as our main trail. It'll ultimately be a paved trail. So multi-surface for biking, hiking, but we'll also have some hiking trails. All those white tubes there's trees in those. So we planted 300 trees on this property. One unique feature of it, as we excavated the land, there was a tremendous amount of sand that we just unearthed, and we actually, you can see this sandy area. That will be about a 6-acre sand prairie. It was planted last fall, so there is some color starting to come in. And that sand prairie and mesic prairie around it will serve as a buffer. So our next steps, as I mentioned, we're currently negotiating for more land. Whether or not those parcels become wetland banks, some of them are not really eligible for that. The other thing I should mention, wetland banking, if you already have a wetland, chances are they're not going to let you put it in a wetland bank. Unless it's a really degraded wetland, you might be able to get some partial credit for enhancing that wetland. But really what the ideal piece of land is to turn into a wetland mitigation bank is an area that maybe was wetland at one time, but has been farmed for many years. And that's kind of the one main parcel that we had. That's what we did. We took farmland and just are turning it back into wetlands. So we've got, we're exploring other ways to continue to fund Nahant Marsh. We might create another mitigation bank at some point if we have the land and the resources to do it. We're looking at potential like stormwater fees, which we get some of those from the city, but other ways that we might be able to generate revenue that way. Brownfield redevelopment. There's a lot of brownfields around us. I alluded to the junkyards. There's several of them in West Davenport, and maybe down the road, there's some potential for brownfield redevelopment on those parcels. There's always a wetland reserve program, which is a USDA program, which essentially pays landowners to build and maintain wetlands in perpetuity. Now, generally, those aren't as lucrative as wetland banks, but they are maybe a little easier to do. And then, you know, a variety of other things. Maybe there's hazard mitigation funds. So we're always exploring new ways to really continue to meet our mission and continue to make at least this part of the Quad Cities a little more natural and a little more functional as an ecosystem, but also as an education center. With that being said, you can see our website there, nahantmarsh.org. And it looks like we've got a few minutes to maybe entertain some questions. So I'll go back to, I'll stop sharing here and then see if we've got any questions from the audience. And I think you can type your questions into the chat box. Is that correct, Kelsey?
Yep, I'm not seeing any questions come in yet, but I'll give folks just a moment here to do so. Yeah, you can enter it into the chat or into the Q&A box. Either will work.
Great. I will say that the trail work on our new property, we've got that trail rocked now, the main trail, which is half-mile long. We'll be working on building a couple other trails through that property. So we'll have about a total of 1.5 miles of trails on that property once done. Then once that's complete, we'll open that property to the public. So I'd encourage you to explore it. It's a really neat thing. Alma, it looks like you wrote, you can sell the credits only once, right? That is correct. So that's the thing. Credits sell for quite a bit of money, but the deal is once you sell that credit, that's it. You can only sell that credit. We have 33 credits to sell. And once we sell those credits, that's it. We can't sell them anymore. The other thing is once we construct this wetland on our property, we are guaranteeing to the Corps that we will never do anything else ever again with that land. It'll always, and we put this, we were required to put these parcels in a conservation easement. So even if we sell the land, that conservation easement will follow. And it's very specific language that this property is a wetland and has to be maintained as a wetland, no matter who owns it for the end of time. And the follow-up, it looks like Alma said, are you required to do anything after 10 years? Well, so part of our agreement with the Corps is for every credit we sell, we set aside about 5% of that sale. And the end of it, we have to have $100,000 set aside in the bank that will be our long-term management fund. Now, do we have to do anything? The Corps does not require us to do anything after 10 years, except for a guarantee that we're maintaining it as a wetland. We can't like go and pave it over or something. Will we do stuff after 10 years? Absolutely. As our organization, we will continue to keep invasive species out of there, continue to monitor biodiversity, all of those things that we do anyways on all of our other parcels. It looks like Kay said, our HOA owns a small wetland. Is there funding available to improve its quality? That's a good question. I would potentially, I think there's potentially a couple sources. You could talk to the NRCS or Soil and Water Conservation District if it's got a history of being farmland at one point. There might be something that they could do. The other option is talking to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's a private lands biologist. His name is Scott James, who works out of the Moline office. And they actually have pots of money to help with habitat enhancement in certain areas on private land. So it might be worth exploring those two options, calling the NRCS or calling Scott James at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service office in Moline. Any other questions? I know some of you have been down and seen this project. If you haven't, we'd certainly welcome you down for a tour at some point. We've had a few tours this summer on the property, so you could always keep your eyes peeled. And I will say, I know the River Action does a golf cart tour, several golf cart tours in early September. And I think they've got one scheduled for September 3rd, and part of that tour will be going on to this new property as well. So if you haven't seen it, you can certainly access it that way too. And you get to drive around in a golf cart on city streets here in Davenport. So that's a lot of fun.
All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions come through. If you do think of one later and you really want to ask it, feel free to send an email to me at kdenoyer@eicc.edu, or you can send it to Brian, and actually I'll go ahead and put those emails in the chat, or you can find them on the Partners of Scott County Watersheds website. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything more come in. So thank you again, Brian, for jumping in and sharing all of this really great information. And thank you everybody for participating. This webinar has been recorded and will be uploaded to the Partners YouTube page in a couple of weeks. So if you want to go back and watch it, you can find it there. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.